Next slide. The structure of today's webinars is that we will focus on more P's. So we will speak about prevention, protection, and prosecution. And then we will have some inspiring practices presented by our guest speakers. So you will see here the program of the day and, I changed several slides. The program of today. So we'll start with the prevention, we'll move on protection and then prosecution, the inspiring practices, and then we will have time for the Q&A. Again, I'm saying that you can type any questions that you may have in the chat box. Thank you very much. And I will give the floor to my colleague Panayota. I didn't introduce myself because I was speaking from the beginning. So my name is Vasia Madesi. I'm working as a consultant, and with my colleague Panayota, we will present today's webinar. Panayota, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Vasia. Hi, everyone. So as noted, we start with prevention. So starting with prevention. Prevention refers to measures that aim prevent incidents of gender-based violence from happening in the first place. So this involves promoting changes in the way people think and act so that everyone in the academic community can feel safe and respected. Now, in the context of academia, prevention can take different forms. A code of conduct, for example, is a common practice. A clear code of conduct is a set of rules and guidelines laying out the expected behaviors of the members of the organization. Now, another prevention measure could be the communication and materials for both existing and newcomers, staff and students, about the forms of gender-based violence. Ongoing awareness-raising campaigns and training programs are also common practices. And awareness-raising campaigns help the victim to acknowledge what gender-based violence is and what are its forms. One of the common reasons why victims not report their incidents, as we've seen in the last webinar from UniSAFE's survey results, is the fact that victims were not aware of what gender-based violence is. Therefore, efficient awareness-raising campaigns are highly, highly important. Now, how to approach prevention? Firstly, it's important to mention that we need to make sure that you provide permanent information on your commitment against gender-based violence. By doing so, you are actively demonstrating your dedication to creating a safe and inclusive environment for all students, staff, and faculty. Awareness-raising campaigns can take many forms, such as social media campaigns, workshops, seminars, events dedicated to topic, perhaps internal radio and TV broadcasts and competitions, and many more. Various channels can be utilized for the promotion of the campaigns, such as posters, leaflets, social media posts, videos, newsletters, or any other form of internal communication tool. Therefore, make sure you offer a variety of campaigns if possible and utilize various channels. An example of awareness-raising campaign is the campaign of the Danish Working Environment Authority named Where Do We Draw the Line? It's a short film that describing sexual harassment and offers dialogue cards that can be used as a game that presents different situations where players must decide how to respond. This could be included, for example, as part of an awareness-raising campaign at a university or research performing organization, in the context of training programs and awareness-raising campaigns. Now, in addition to outlining the commitment, institutions should also provide information on the process of making a complaint and ensure that safe channels are in place for individuals to report incidents of gender-based violence. Providing permanent information and a safe channel to complain is crucial because it helps in creating a culture of accountability and transparency where gender-based violence is not tolerated and victims and survivors are supported. Now, the commitment against gender-based violence and a campaign in general are more likely to be effective when there is a clear communication strategy established. You may find the step-by-step guide designed by UniSAFE on how to build an awareness-raising campaign on UniSAFE's website that we can also share with you after this webinar. Training programs and empowerment of bystander is another prevention measure, highly suggested. Educational programs and trainings aim to provide the community with information about the policies of the institution, the procedures, reporting options, but also available resources and services. Training serves as an opportunity for the staff and students to ask questions, to clarify policies, and engage in an open dialogue about the issue. So as a result, training can increase the confidence of the community and the trust in supporting in trusting the institution in reporting incidents and creating a more supportive and informed community. Now, a thorough educational program should at the very least guarantee that the participants, students and staff members are informed about the definition of gender-based violence and its forms, to understand the power imbalances and how they contribute to violence, to help them recognize of warning signs and behaviors that may indicate risk of violence, but also it's an opportunity to review the organizational policies and procedures, but also the relevant laws and legal protection for victims and perpetrators. Techniques for bystander intervention can also be part of this educational program, and any discussion about the impact of violence on individuals, on the team, on the organization are suggested. And of course, skills for promoting a culture of respect and equality in the workplace can be part of such educational program. Now, bystander intervention refers to the actions taken by individuals who observe a potential harmful situation. The purpose is to prevent further violence from occurring, and a bystander intervention training program offers education and training to staff and students on recognizing those signs and on developing intervention skills and provide guidelines, clear guidelines for them for intervening or reporting incidents, including support for those who intervene. Now, moving to some tips and hints on prevention. As previously mentioned, communication departments are key stakeholders for the implementation of a prevention strategy. Such strategy can be embedded to the institutional communication strategy that will support the institutionalization of prevention measures. Therefore, make sure you engage the communication department in the design and implementation process. In order to reach the broadest possible audience, you can share information on activities and training opportunities through multiple channels. The institution's main channels, such as the website, the official social media pages, etc., are important to be used. I'm sorry, I have been muted. Okay, moving on. Now, in order to hold perpetrators accountable, ensure that faculty, staff, students, and institutional enforcement services in general are aware of the gender-based policies, gender-based violence, policies, or code of conducts and procedures and all possible sanctions that exist in the university, in the institution, as previously mentioned. When providing information about hotline support services or reporting procedures on the website of the institution, make sure that this information is as accessible as possible for the user. Avoid adding those information under subcategories or hidden under specific pages, departments, or offices, as they need to be as easily accessible in case of an emergency. Newcomers, staff, and students are an important target group to design specific materials related to the forms of gender-based violence. Therefore, make sure you design actions tailor-made for that audience. A good practice is also to build allies by identifying individuals, either students or staff, who are committed to preventing gender-based violence and who are willing to be part of a prevention working group responsible perhaps for the design and the implementation of the practices and activities. Now, building actions specifically to top management, leadership, the deans, the head of department is another good practice because it points out their role and their responsibility in securing safe working and study environments. Resources allocation has to be sufficient in order to maintain the sustainability of the practices. And lastly, monitor and evaluation systems has to be in place to assess the components of the prevention program and ensure that it remains relevant and effective. Now, how does intersectionality can be taken into consideration when designing prevention measures? As a first step, when designing a preventative measure, consider the different ways in which intersectional identities impact the definition, the recognition, but also the response to incidents of gender-based violence to different groups. When offering trainings, you can highlight the experiences of marginalized communities, as well also when designing campaigns. You can provide targeted support and resources for staff and students with intersecting identities, and this could be offered in different languages or awareness-raising campaigns in different formats, such as Braille writing system or different languages. Make sure you engage with staff and students with diverse background, that they can act as experts or informants during the design of a training program or a campaign, and gather their feedback and comments. By developing participatory process in which these groups are involved, we highlight their involvement and the importance of having their perspective in our training materials and awareness-raising campaigns. Lastly, you can also offer training on the notion of privilege with an intersectional approach. Prevention is also about training the staff and students about the accepted behaviors and recognition that gender-based violence affects some groups more than others. Now, having said that, we can move to the next P of the 7P framework, which is protection. So going back to Vasya and changing the slides.
Thank you, Panayota. So what do we mean by protection, and where do we start with protection? Protection comes even though we have preventive measures when an incident occurs, in order to ensure the safety of individuals inside our institutions. So that means that we need to establish clear procedures and also infrastructure in order people know how to report an incident, and that they feel that they are supported when reporting a gender-based violence incident. This includes measures about victims, survivors, bystanders, whistleblowers, and intermediaries, and so on. So what is protection? What we mean when we use that term? It means that we should be able as an institution to provide immediate safety and safe spaces for victim survivors. It means that we need to provide emergency accommodation, also clear information and support on how to report, and what are the reporting procedures and the possibilities. Can we report informally, formally, and what that means, all the different steps. And protection against retaliations and dismissal for people who report, that people feel heard. Also, inside the protection P, we need to assess the risks of gender-based violence incidents, to avoid more incidents to occur, and to identify any potential patterns inside our institution. Now, I'm trying to change the slide. Okay. Now, the protection measures should be taken in order to cover all the types of harmful behaviors, and as soon as an incident is reported, even if there is no formal complaint, or in any case of an anonymous reporting, we need to ensure that we can protect the individuals in our community. So that means that protection should be offered not only what we think inside a campus or in the premises of an institutions, but also in online setting, during a student event, a conference, or maybe a field trip outside the campus. So it can also happen, an incident can happen outside the campus, such as during conferences or field research activities. And we need to have protective measures even in these situations that we don't always think when we speak about gender-based violence. So now, moving on some tips and hints for protection. You should remember that we, as an institution, we should provide a range of potential solutions to our victim survivors, the whistleblowers, or the person that it is reporting. The protection measures, of course, are determined on a case-by-case basis, and we need to take into account what has happened, the specific requirements of one situation, but we should have a full set of potential solutions. Regarding the reporting procedure, we need to ensure that we have effective reporting provisions that are in place, and that the institution can provide the protection that it's needed. This means that we can consider having different options for reporting. A person can report in person or online. They can do it anonymously or not anonymously. They can do it in a formal or informal setting, in different languages as well, in order to ensure that all the members of the community are equally heard. And also the reporting system should be accessible 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Also, this means that the protection measures will be accessible 24 hours. Also, we need to give the possibility to report to the institutions when we are speaking about mobile researchers, mobile students, people that are outside the premises in a field trip, and so on. The next slide, a few more tips and hints. Here, we need to think of who can provide the protection. So protection can be provided either by a specific contact point or a person in its faculty, for students or staff. It depends on the case. From a dedicated service, for example, this could be a human resources officer for staff or for students, or to an emergency warden or security officer. We need to think of all possible contact persons, whether specifically designated to deal with gender-based violence or to act in emergencies as first responders. For example, the security personnel can also act as protection persons, as contact points. But it is important to have given specific training to the contact persons, so they are understanding all the different forms of violence and their continuum. So they need to provide trauma-informed care. They need to empathize with the victim or the person that it is reporting, and also practice active listening without judging and without giving any further burden to the person that it is reporting. Some more tips and hints on protection. Let's go back one slide. I think we skipped one slide. Okay. In order to give to the persons, the victims, a sense of safety and protections, in order to reduce their fear to reprisal, we need to have settings and procedures that allow an immediate response from our institution. We need to act before there is any escalation. Also, we need to establish an accessible and transparent procedure for handling the incidents and complaints at an early stage. So we need to encourage reporting by providing complete information on the possible sanctions against the perpetrators, and also to give a clear signal of the importance and also the value of reporting all the incidents. Also, we need to avoid procedures that require the manager or supervisor to be contacted first. So this complements what we say about clear procedures, and also the contact persons, the first contact persons need to be educated and trained in order to offer support. We need to be always supportive. We don't need to ignore, minimize, or downplay any incident. And also there is a practice that people warn for that false allegations are punishable under criminal law. This may discourage a victim by officially reporting one incident. So we need to be careful when using these type of terms in order not to discourage victims from speaking up. So now we need also to ensure that we are protecting the totality of the community. So in this case, and when we're speaking about mobile researchers, it is a good practice to foresee emergency funding to allow traveling expenses in incidents that occur during the field trips and conferences, so that the person can travel back to its origin institution or and country location. And also when it comes to online violence, we need to be careful about social networks and online teaching and emails. We know that online spaces, because they have sometimes anonymity, can be very harmful. So we need to flag incidents and make sure that the system is easily accessible and known to all on how to get support in the case of an online violence incident. And as we said, we are also taking care of intersectional aspects. So how we can consider intersectionality in the protection measures. So in order to be responsive to intersectional gender-based violence, we need to meet the needs of groups that experience multiple and intersecting inequalities and discrimination. We need to conduct risk assessments in advance to understand what are the risks faced by the LGBTQI community, for example, in staff and students. This is just an example, but we need to think of the different communities existing inside our institutions and assessing. Also, the contact persons and the services that are providing protection measures need to be culturally responsive and respectful. So in order to do that, we need to have specific training. And lastly, when it is possible, to establish a diverse group of contact persons in terms of gender, background, origin, and so on, because this will make the reporting parties who are coming from minority groups to be more comfortable when reporting an incident. They could feel that they are somehow represented and heard. And finally, supportive and protected. So this being said, we can move on the prosecution, which is the last P we will present today. And I give the floor back to my colleague Panayota.
Yes, thank you, Vasia. So moving on to the last P presented today, as mentioned, prosecution. Now, in the context again of academia, Prosecution refers specifically to internal disciplinary measures against alleged perpetrators, related investigative measures, and sanctions. In some cases, it may also involve judicial proceedings, including court cases, criminal and civil offenses. When working on prosecution practices, we need to have in mind that our primary focus is our victims. So a victim-centered and gender-responsive approach is necessary. Clear, accessible, and transparent procedures for handling incidents and complaints are important to be in place, and there should be a reasonable timeline between complaints, investigation, and decision or sanctions. So similarly to protection, training should be offered to those involved in the procedure to make sure they're aware of how they handle cases of gender-based violence. When working on prosecution, we need to make sure that a continuous communication exists about the process of prosecution and is established with the survivor, victims, perpetrators, bystanders along the different steps of prosecution. Investigation measures and the burden of proof should be applied on the person who brings a claim in a dispute, and specific disciplinary procedures should be set for staff and students. As previously mentioned, the composition of the investigation and disciplinary committee or any other committee related to the processes should be composed of trained people representing the different stakeholders. For example, representatives of the leadership, representatives from the students community or trade unions, and the gender balanced approach should be also taken in mind. Lastly, remember that different types of sanctions should apply for different forms of violence, something that we're going to revisit again later. Sexual and gender-based violence in general are notoriously difficult to investigate and prosecute. So the various legal contexts applicable to research organizations in Europe and the variety of situations in which offenses occur requires flexibility in the investigative approach and sanctions. Therefore, key principles applying our victim-centered approach, as we mentioned, and a recognition of the specificities of gender-based violence, as mentioned before. So, having said that, a clear prosecution strategy should be in place that is known by everyone, by staff and students. The code of conduct was previously mentioned in prevention. The code of conduct should be always accompanied by a protocol that sets out the procedures in case of a violation of the code of conduct. Having a clear information of what can serve as an evidence according to the different forms of gender-based violence is highly important to be communicated within the community, but also with the victims in case of a report of an incident. Informal and formal disciplinary procedures, should be clearly set out and be established, including the types of disciplinary actions or sanctions. For example, verbal or written warnings, suspension, dismissal, perpetrator treatment or counseling, or ongoing supervision. We need to avoid setting fixed time limits for when a complaint can be made. It is important to acknowledge and recognize that cases of sexual harassment and violence may have occurred years ago, and it may take time before a victim or survivor is ready to report it. By providing clear and reasonable timeframes to each stage of the complaint procedures is a practice that also promotes trust, transparency, and accountability within the community. The complainant and the accused both have the right to be represented by a trade union or a lawyer or a friend. Therefore, we need to acknowledge that during the procedure. And another good suggestion and practice is to avoid having joint meetings to clarify the situation with both parties, or having external mediation and conciliation procedures between the parties. by providing regular feedback on the process to the person who complained is an important practice that also promotes a sense of safety and security for the victim. Now, when addressing the investigation measures, we need to remember that an investigation can start only when a formal complaint is made. Informal or anonymous complaints are used to assess the situation, to identify patterns inside the institution, and to assess the context and the behavior of the perpetrator, and to take protective and preventing measures. We need to make sure that there is a clear process for conducting independent, internal or external investigations. And if there is an internal committee, as we mentioned before, the composition should be diverse to ensure that the point of view of the victim is reflected, as previously mentioned by Vasia. For example, if a student will be a member of that committee if the victim is a student. Having external members in such committee is a good practice, but we also need to have in mind to avoid conflict of interest in the composition of investigation or disciplinary committee, especially when the accused is a member of staff. The investigators of the cases have to be trained to understand gender-based violence and to carry out investigations in a gender-responsive way by understanding trauma and its impact on the way abuse is reported. Now, as far as possible, the reporting of investigation should protect the anonymity of victims and witnesses. And lastly, investigation should continue even if the victim or perpetrator has resigned, as the institution may learn important lessons about underlying root causes, causal factors, etc. Causal factors, excuse me, etc. Now, reviewing now the disciplinary measures. The disciplinary process should be specific to gender-based violence and not follow general disciplinary rules and procedures. Gender-based violence should not be dealt with in the same way as, for example, plagiarism for students is addressed. The main idea behind disciplinary action is to correct behavior, which does not necessarily involve sanctions. Of course, this is not valid for severe forms of gender-based violence. Correction of behavior cannot be valid in such cases. There should be, however, a progressive disciplinary rationale in place, and this requires that disciplinary interventions are always documented. Depending on the nature and severity of the misconduct, it may be appropriate to use constructive measures and sanctions, particularly for milder offenses. Formal disciplinary measures may include verbal or written warnings, as we mentioned before, retraining, suspension, dismissal, counseling, or ongoing supervisions. And lastly, remember that the institution should avoid imitating judicial processes, such as conducting hearings, and should also understand that the standard of evidence beyond reasonable doubt does not mean proof beyond any possible doubt. To ensure now that to ensure trust of victims survivors, it is also essential that the findings and recommendations of the investigation committee are fully acted upon, and the ability to impose sanctions on the perpetrator regardless of status is essential. Sanctions are depending on the power relationship between the two sides, and the greater the power difference, the stronger the sanction for perpetrators. Sanctions should be communicated to the victim, survivor, and bystanders, as we mentioned before, in a reasonable time frame. And it is important to know that internal prosecution should be independent of the victim survivor's decision to report the incident to the police or to the judicial authorities. And some tips and hints on prosecution. The creation of a specific external body for investigating incident can be shared with other similar institutions in the region or country, particularly for small institutions that cannot have their own specific investigating body. So make it clear to the management that Being afraid of potential pursuit by the perpetrator is not a valid argument. This is something really common being said from top management, because victims can also sue the institution for inaction. Also, monitoring of investigations and sanctions will demonstrate that there is a consistent approach to holding perpetrators accountable, that high-value scholars or senior managers are not protected or given special treatment. To ensure that the perpetrator does not reoffend elsewhere, you may consider recording severe forms of transgressive behaviors as research misconduct. Research misconduct is public information that follows the perpetrator and is communicated widely. Lastly, ensure that the victim is not required to provide answers or being interviewed more than once by the investigator committee or other people involved in the process. In this way, we avoid re-victimization, and this should be our priority. And similarly, we need to ensure that victims are not required to give their testimony in the presence of their perpetrator. And the last point is that no one should be asked to sign a confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement as part of the resolution of a complaint. Moving to the last part of prosecution, how do we think intersectionally? We need to ensure that an intersectional approach of anti-discrimination policies is taken at every stage of the process, and whenever possible, investigation and prosecution committees are diverse and include experts in intersectional or multiple forms of violence, as we mentioned. We need to ensure that all campus law enforcement and public safety officers receive ongoing and up-to-date training on the dynamics of gender-based violence, including the impact of trauma on victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, and gender-based violence in general. And lastly, sanctions should consider multiple and intersectional discrimination in their processes. Now, having said that, we now conclude the presentation of the three Ps presented today, and we move to the last part of our webinar, the inspiring practice and experience exchange. So I'm giving the floor back to Vasia to introduce our speakers.
Thank you very much, Panayota. We have provided very rich content so far. So today with us, we have Rachel Payne and Christy Waller, both coming from the Oxford Brookes University, to present the sexual consent education project. OBU, Oxford Brookes University, is also one of the partners of UniSAFE project. We will have with us today Rachel, who is a principal lecturer in education and student experience at Oxford Brookes. And in this capacity, she leads the sexual consent education project, which she co-created with Christy Waller in 2018 to 19. Christy Waller's background is in youth and community work. And prior to working with Oxford Brookes University, she was delivering consent workshops in youth clubs and some festivals. She's currently working for a national domestic abuse charity, supporting children and young people with lived experience who want to use their expertise to influence policy change and to develop best practices. And she has been working with Oxford Brookes University as an external consultant since 2018. So thank you both for being here with us today. And I give you the floor.
Thank you. Can I share my slides?
Yes, please.
Okay, hello everybody. It's really great to be here. Thank you for inviting us. I'm going to, well, Vasia, you gave us a really great introduction, so I don't really need to say, oh, sorry, I don't really need to say very much about myself, except I think myself and Christy started this project back in 2018. It started as a little pilot study, we had identified a gap in provision at Oxford Brookes, and we wanted to explore what students thought about it and how they thought we might be able to address it. Christy, is there anything else you want to say in terms of introduction to yourself?
No, I think only my other experience is as an independent sexual violence advisor, supporting children and young people who've experienced sexual harm and domestic abuse. And it's really great to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
So I would say that as a result of this initial little pilot, I mean, we only work with a very small number of first and second year undergraduate students to explore the possibility of developing provision and what they would like us to develop. And the findings of that I presented to one of our vice chancellors for student and staff experience, and she asked me to present it to a university-wide committee. The committee is called the Quality and Learning Infrastructure Committee, and they invited us to develop this project over 3 to 5 years. So it kind of started from very small beginnings, but I think the only reason that we were able to get it off the ground was by having by it being legitimized and us being given a particular remit from the university itself and from senior members of staff. These are our general aims for the project, and these came from QLIC, actually, from the university committee. They wanted us to begin by creating an online resource for students to ensure equal access to high quality content. We recognise that online materials only go so far as a preventative measure, and we recognise that this is always intended to be our starting point. It's definitely not our finishing point. It's only one of various things that we do within this project. But we have been working on these online materials over a period of time. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. Additional aims, really, it's about raising awareness of the importance of sexual consent education and consent, actually, not just sexual consent education, but consent more broadly as well, and to support staff and students to be responsible for generating a safe campus environment. So it's very much positioned from a university perspective, and the cons that go out about this is very much about staff and students contributing to the community, but also taking responsibility for themselves. And in that sense, we are seeking to change the culture at our university. We recognise that we have high levels of misogyny on as universities do across the UK, but at least it's an opportunity for us to acknowledge and to actively work towards changing this. The modules themselves, so we've worked with an outside agent. It's an organisation called Brook Young People. They are a UK charity that support young people's sexual health, and they designed, it was actually came out of a PhD study and was designed in collaboration with young people. They have 5 online modules which we license from them, so we pay for them on an annual basis, and they address definitions of consent, the law, myths and ambiguities, how to talk about consent without upsetting the mood, and also support and guidance. And that last module is geared specifically to Oxford Brookes and the Oxford Brookes community. They are interactive. They are actually, they're really great. We trialed them with our students before we took them on board, and there's all of the students who engaged with them. We had 100% who said that they thought we should take these particular modules on board, and I think it was 90% who thought that they should be mandatory from the off-go, which was quite an interesting statistic. So we've been working on how we package and present these modules to students over the last 2 years, and we have been working towards mandating the modules, which will happen from September 2023. This has been quite a long process, and is really something that we're taking the lead from students. Students want this to happen, so it's not something we're imposing. It's something that we're listening, and we are co-creating and we're talking with students about what they want. And a big part of that is the work that we do with the Brooks Union. So our student union is very closely connected to the work that we're doing, and they are also lobbying on behalf of students for this to happen. A lot of the work that we've done over the last couple of years has been about positioning these in a trauma-informed way and placing the survivor first. And so in terms of mandating the modules, the expectation for students will be that they will have to go to an online site to access the modules, but at the point at access, they are given the option to opt in or to opt out. Nobody would be asked to complete the modules if it was going to be detrimental in any way, shape or form, if it was going to trigger or be difficult for them in any way. And so for those who do opt out, there's an opportunity for them to indicate why they're opting out in a very quick tick box way, and for them to indicate if they need additional support. And we can monitor all of this information behind the scenes and track and contact these individuals and provide additional support for them. Everybody else is expected to complete the modules. They will be given from September, they will be given a full semester in order to complete, so that people have time to decide how they want to engage with the modules. And we have provided the content of the modules in alternative formats. So for example, this year we had a student who approached us who wanted to access the information as a PDF so that she could talk it through with her counsellor before deciding whether or not it was an appropriate content for her to engage with. Additionally, we've created a centralized web page. You can see the web link up on the site there on the slide. We do have social media comms that go through different channels, both in terms of the main university comms and also through our Brooks Union comms. We've developed a webinar series. Our last webinar was a couple of weeks ago, and it was looking at positive masculinities. And these are designed as spaces to open up quite difficult conversations. We encourage experts. So we often have experts who come in from outside of the university to sit on these panels, but also staff and students are also represented on these webinars. And all of the recordings are uploaded to our webpage, and the students often engage with them after the event. They can access them. You can access them there too if you would like to see the kind of work that we're doing. We have a range of in-person events, including we have a presence at our Freshers Fair, which is kind of induction for new students in September. We run a November roadshow where we go across all of our campuses. We have 5 different campuses. And that kind of works towards a celebration of International Day of Consent, which is on the 30th of November. And we're opening up new opportunities for online events, for example, working more closely with campus safety, looking at how we can have a better presence at student induction, and also as open days, so that we are available to talk to parents too about the work that we're doing. We provide a range of, so we have provided a range of support for students. We're in the middle of a change in relation to that at the moment. We've lobbied for an independent sexual violence advisor to be employed by the university, which we're in the process of. They are about to be employed. They have just recruited somebody. So our support for students is in a little bit of transition at the moment, but hopefully it will become much more stable and much more consistent for students. Christy has done a lot of work with students, which has been fantastic. But having somebody employed on a full-time basis also provides opportunity for support for staff as well. And we are also in the process of developing a bystander pilot and a pilot with staff as well, to support staff to engage with the content. These are very much ongoing at the moment. In terms of responsibilities, from my perspective as the project lead, there are certain things that I have to lead. So we have a strategy group meeting once a fortnight for an hour, and everybody who is a key stakeholder is part of that strategy group. So myself and Christy. I have a couple of colleagues who are actually in the audience and here today who were part of the strategy group. So we have Elise, who's our comms manager. We have somebody who's an IT specialist. we have a project assistant, we have Sarah, who's a student experience fellow, who's also an academic. She's an academic in public health, and Sarah's here with us today as well. And we have our colleagues from the Brookes Union, and we also have several student representatives. Some of those are paid and some of them aren't. So we provide opportunity for people who may want to volunteer and participate. And we think it's really important that we, within the strategy group, that we're able to capture a range of voices and that a range of different experiences from across the university come together in order to steer the project. But we also have a steering group which meets once or twice a semester, and those are allies from both staff, students and Brookes Union groups who come together and critique what we're doing and give us a steer and help us to analyze some of the content that we might be struggling with, and we provide them with an opportunity to get involved with us and to support us as well. We work with a huge number of different colleagues across the university. It's really complicated work, and really we need to work with people at a very high level. So the project is overseen by a member of our Vice Chancellor group and another member of the Vice Chancellor group who is in charge of kind of a lot of the kind of student functions, the student well-being, looking after the tech, all of these kind of functions that happen at a very high level within the university. We have to communicate with them as well, and we are working in collaboration with them at the moment in order to make the modules mandatory, because that involves quite a lot of complexity in terms of student, the pragmatics of how we're going to do that. We work with our EDI groups, so our equality, diversity and inclusion groups. We work with student support coordinators who are designed to support students specifically. They're not academic staff, they are professional staff who support students. We work with induction staff, we work with occupational health, we work with HR, and we also present to our Vice Chancellor group. So it's very high level work. You know, thinking about how it fits in with the other Ps, we are supporting the generation of policy through the work that we do, and that touches on, that touches on provision of services, it touches on protection, and it touches on partnerships. So I wouldn't see this as something that we do in isolation. It's very much part of a much bigger conversation. And we've just developed a gender-based violence strategy group, which is a university-wide group which supports academics, researchers, professional staff, students, Brookes Union, external consultants, all sorts of people who are interested and involved in conversations about gender-based violence from a whole range of different perspectives across the university. We're now beginning to meet and talk, which is an exciting development, and the consent work is central to that. In terms of capacity and resources, so I have to apply for an annual budget. It's very small, it's less than 20 grand a year. However, some of my time is paid for, so I currently have a day and a half to work on this. A week, and that is paid for by the Vice Chancellor group. The budget pays for Christie's time, it also pays for Sarah's time, and it pays for a project assistant as well, and it pays for our involvement with a range of different partners, and it pays for our comms. We really do it on a shoestring budget. We have very little. We do work with quite a good range of external consultants and with expert groups, and we always try to bring in expertise where we don't have it. We see that as absolutely crucial. I'm trying to think if there's occupational health is important, because we realized very quickly that actually there were members of our strategy team who had the potential, who were getting triggered by some of the content, and so we negotiated with our occupational health team for everybody to have access to quarterly, so every 3 months they have an opportunity to get in touch with a specialist who actually operates externally from the university to talk about their experiences of the project or anything that they want to talk about. And equally, anybody who needs immediate support is able to access that through occupational health. And I think that was really crucial to ensure the safety and security of everybody who's working on the project. I don't think I need to. There's a lot of the stakeholders I've already mentioned here. We work quite closely with the University of Oxford because we share a lot of the concerns about the city and the safety and security for the students. So we've worked closely with the with their union, with their student union. We invite them along to our webinars and they participate, and we've had several meetings with professionals who work at Oxford University behind the scenes so that we can share good practice, and that's a really, even though our systems are very different, it's very beneficial for us to have a much wider conversation about what's happening in the city. We also have a colleague at the University of Northampton who is doing some really superb work at the University of Northampton, and she is acting more like a critical friend for us. And we kind of, again, we're sharing practice and we're supporting each other with the work that we're doing. And we find that really useful. We're working with, so OSARC, it stands for Oxfordshire's Sexual Abuse and Rape and Crisis Centre, and so when our ISVA is employed, they will be based at OSARC, so that they are working with other ISVAs, and then but their capacity will specifically be for our university. So they will be based at OSARC, but they will work with us. And we also have a whole range of different associate college partners and school partnerships that we include in the work that we do to support an earlier conversation about this before young people get to university. I'm going to hand over to Christy, who's going to talk about intersectionality.
Thank you, Rachel. So as Rachel said, at the start of this work, we completed a feasibility study to see if students felt there was a need for sexual consent education. In the first workshop, we had all white middle-class feminist students. At that point, we were very aware we needed to engage with a wider, more representative selection of students. Therefore, when it came to our second round of workshops, when we were reviewing the modules developed by Brooke Young People, we changed our comms approach and we managed to recruit a very diverse range of students, many international, some men and non-binary students. The outcome of this workshop was amazing. Students fed back that the modules themselves did not include enough diverse representation. We spoke to Brooke Young People, and apparently we were the first institution to question the representation of people in the modules. Brooke Young People appreciated the feedback and changed the names of some of the people in the scenarios so that the situations were less heteronormative, and changed some of the photos using the modules so they were more diverse. Within the webinars we've delivered, we've tried to offer intersectional topics and questions and a diverse representation of panel guests. However, this has not always been an easy task, and moving forward, we're in the process of developing an EDI checklist for events, and we are also developing an inclusion of intersectionality in our terms of reference. So in terms of, I'm just going to move, hang on. In terms of guidance for others, I would say that it's important that you have that the project is legitimized by people at the top of the university. The senior leaders really need to legitimize the work, and they need to be really visible in doing that. It's not enough just to kind of indicate to the strategy group that you can go ahead and do stuff. We want them on comms, we want them talking to students, we want them really visibly supporting the work that we're doing. However, it's important that they are not dictating what we're doing. Okay, so it's important that they support us, but it's really important that we are talking with people that this impacts, so that we work closely with students, that we work closely with our student union, in order to nurture kind of co-created partnerships between staff and students. And so that we can, I think Christy will say a little bit about this as well, we want to be more engaged with survivor and survivor voice than we have been up to this point. But where we have, it's been absolutely invaluable in shaping the work that we've done.
And in that sense, it's really important that we nurture relationships and that we take the time to listen. And that I can't stress that enough. A lot of the work that I do involves listening to other people and allowing space for us to unpack the difficulties of the work that we're doing. We can't make rash judgments or quick decisions. Sometimes these things need to be debated over quite a period of time to make sure that we're all very happy with what we're doing and how we're going to move forward, and that we are being absolutely trauma informed in everything that we're doing. Christy, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, I mean, in regards to what we would do differently, if I could start this project again from the beginning, I'd embed victim survivor expertise visibly from the very start. However, I'm very aware that that process of including expertise by experience can be very time consuming and an expensive process, and we need to ensure that those providing the victim survivor expertise are compensated for their time and benefit from access to clinical supervision, and ultimately the work completed with them is delivered in a safe and trauma-informed way. I would also ensure that clinical supervision from occupational health is available from the very start. That was definitely an error, like something we've definitely learned early on. We should have put that in at the very beginning. And finally, would have developed a better relationship with the university's comms team from the very start. However, I cannot see this as being possible, as the comms had a financial cost, and at first we didn't have funding for comms, so it was just really hard to work out. We needed comms, but we didn't have funding for it. So I'd suggest anybody else starting this project to just get funding from comms for the very beginning.
Thanks, Christy. In terms of our challenges and obstacles, God, there's been so many. The whole thing has been complicated right from the word go and continues to be. I think that it has been complicated by the fact that getting the university to acknowledge issues of gender-based violence has been difficult, but that is now changing, which is great. I think we're having much more open conversations. I'm invited to some quite strategic meetings, and we have a voice in a way that we didn't before, but we had to work very hard to get that voice. And I think it's really important that you've nurtured those good relationships with senior leaders. I think it's really important that you support colleagues to understand what trauma-informed practice is, because even where we're working with colleagues who are in, student welfare, or they may be working in terms of report and support and supporting and protection, that there are, especially from kind of intersectional perspectives, there are things that they may not understand that are specific to gender-based violence. So kind of supporting staff to understand potential bias is really is critical, but really difficult. And I suppose in terms of getting students to engage as well is actually quite difficult. Christy, is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's just a really hard process, like advertising the modules at Freshers' Day and things like that, having that awareness that any student you might approach could be a victim survivor. So it's about approaching those students in a very trauma-informed way, gaining consent to speak to them about the consent modules. And yeah, it's just a long process. Everything takes a bit longer, I think, than you would hope it would, kind of thing. Yeah,
it really does. It really does. In terms of monitoring and evaluating, we had, so Brooks Union did a really big survey of capturing student voice and student experience of campus safety last academic year, and that has really informed, it's helped us lobby our Vice-Chancellor group and to begin to develop some really significant change. So capturing student voice and capturing student voice en masse has been really important. We have, as an academic, I have developed several of the pieces of work, and Sarah is doing so as well, as research, as academic research. So we have ethical approval to capture data, and so we do capture data through focus group interviews with students and staff about various aspects of the project. When we first introduced the online modules, we asked students to complete an online questionnaire, which was really useful. And I think we're definitely going to need to monitor that very carefully as we move into mandating the modules from September. And we are aware of kind of the data from our audiences, how many people we get coming to the webinar. Our last webinar was the best attended. We had over 50 people who signed up, which is amazing. So thinking about, you know, the reach of the work that we're doing and how many people from outside of the university are beginning to engage with it. In terms of the sustainability of the work, I mean, of course, it's important that senior leaders buy into it, but they have to, it's important that they are still willing to pay for it. So, you know, having that annual budget, albeit a very small annual budget, is absolutely crucial for sustaining this work. Without that, it wouldn't really happen. What's quite useful for us at the moment in the UK is the Office for Students, which is a government organisation. They have, last year, they released a series of expectations that every university had to follow in relation to gender-based violence. And we're in the process of consulting with them about how we present the prevention materials and how we make our provision really explicit to our students. And so we've been consulting on that. So having opportunity to contribute to things that actually have quite big national implications and government and policy implications really helps to sustain the work as well. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there because I think we ran over. I'm really sorry about that. But that's it. We're finished.
Thank you very much, both Rachel and Christy, for your presentation.